All right, welcome back. In case you're just joining us, it's time for our conversation right now. Johnson Chukwu, who is the Group Managing Director at Cowry Asset Management, is joining me right now via Skype. Hello, Mr. Chukwu, and good morning to you. How is Lagos?
Good morning, Nancy. Lagos is good. The weather is very clement. Not too hot, not too cold, not cold, just a mild temperature.
Okay, I think we're also experiencing same thing here in Abuja, at least this area. It rained cat and dogs yesterday in Abuja, I think from morning till evening. Sometimes I say, what actually is happening this year in Abuja? Because the rains, when they come, is not really that intense in Abuja. I may be wrong though. But let's get started, Mr. Chukwu. It rained yesterday. The data rained yesterday, GDP numbers. But first and foremost, okay, I'm being told that our second guest is joining us right now, so let me also welcome him to the forum. Dr. Adedeji, Adeniran, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Nancy. It's nice joining you once again.
Okay, nice. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fabulous.
Okay, let's get started with the interview. Mr. Chukwu, let me start with you and ask you this simple question for our viewers. Yesterday, the NBS released GDP numbers. Like I said earlier, it was a data rain yesterday. We were expecting those numbers for Q2 2020. But let us understand what GDP means. Mr. Chukwu, what does GDP mean? It's very simple. Can you just simplify it? Then I'll come to Dr. Adedeji to tell us what the significance of GDP means. So very simple in ABC terms, what does GDP mean?
Okay, Nancy, thank you once again for having me. GDP is an abbreviation of gross domestic product, which means the summation of the monetary value of all goods and services produced in an economy within a period.
Okay. Economics 101. Dr. Adedeji, what's the significance? So that we can take off from there, so that my viewers can understand what we're saying. What's the significance of this?
So like you mentioned, it's summation of all economic activities within the economy. So, to an individual, it just means what you earn as income over a period of time. And so when on average, you say GDP is increasing, it means on average, the people are also doing well. And when it declines, it also means that at least on average, even though you might see some people doing well, it means majority are not doing well. When you accumulate these together. So that's why we emphasize on economic growth as crucial to many things: economic development, poverty reduction, and the rest. Because behind that big numbers, it's just what me and you are passing through in terms of our daily lives. Are we increasing in productivity? Are we earning income? And if we are doing well, and if majority of the people are doing well, this number look very good and rosy. And when majority is also not doing well, like in the present case, the number nose drive, and it reflects on living standard to some extent, because GDP is not the only thing that talks about living standard, but it reflects about how much individuals are doing.
Okay. I needed us to start off with that background. So in essence, it shows us the rate of economic activity. What it means is that Mr. Chukwu, Dr. Adedeji, Nancy, it's a summation of our economic activity, at least in the last 1 year, between the Q2 of 2020 and the last Q2, isn't it? So it means if you make 1 naira, I make 1 naira, you make 1 naira, 3 naira in the last 1 year. Am I making sense? I need to break it down
sure.
Yes, for my viewers. But doesn't it also mean that if I make 0 naira, 0, you make 1, Mr. Chukwu make 1, 2 plus, 1 plus 0 plus 1. That's what,
1.
Isn't it? So that means that Mr. Chukwu, if he also makes 5 or he makes 10 and I make 0 and you make 0, what does it mean? Mr. Chukwu, take it down.
It then means if previously the three of us were making 2 naira or 3 naira and one person is now making 5 naira. It simply means that the GDP has grown, but in terms of income distribution, that income distribution has become more obtuse, in the sense that it becomes more unfair, in the sense that you have more poor people while you have a few very rich persons. And that's why Dr. Adedeji said that GDP does not measure the entirety of economic indicators. Does not show all the economic indicators. You have to look at the income distribution, look at the poverty level, a lot of other factors you have to look at. If you want to measure the standard of living of the citizen, you look at the level of employment, look at the level of inflation, look at the exchange rate, other factors. But in back of the envelope, when you talk of the gross domestic product, you're saying, look, what is the totality of the goods and monetary value of goods and services produced within this economy in a specific period of time? If that value declines, it then means when you share it across the population of the people, so in that case, you're looking at per capita income, it reduces. And when you share the value of goods and services produced and it comes down, as we have been experiencing, it then means that each person's share is declining on an average basis. It does not necessarily mean you will not have a Dangote in that economy, or an Otedola, or a Samar Rabiu, or a Nnaji in that economy. But those of us like Justin Chukwu have very few to share, because the value of what is produced in our economy has actually contracted.
Mr. Chukwu, did you just put yourself with, I really don't understand. You just put me in the category of Dangote and Abdul Samad Rabiu? Okay.
Is that not where you belong to?
Okay, let me receive it, like they say. Let me receive it. All right, Dr. Adedeji, the numbers that we saw yesterday by the NBS, let us break it down right now. What's your view?
So, I mean, if you look at the activities in Q2 and a lot of things, there are many developments in Q2, and none of it actually has anything that it's a good news for, I mean, Nigerian economy. You look at in Q2, that was when actually the Nigerian economy went into full-blown crisis around COVID-19. There was a big lockdown of economic activity, and major economic center in Nigeria, Lagos, Abuja, Ogun State, and Kano, they were locked down during this period. And you look at even in the global sense, there was, I mean, weak demand. And if your trading partners are not doing well, you are not going to, you also will not be doing well. I mean, so we could not trade, and that you see in the figures for both oil and our trade. You look at trade declined by about around 15%. I mean, that's expected given nobody is buying, everybody is involving in some kind of COVID-19 nationalism. And when you look at sectors that were on full lockdown, like education, accommodation, and food services, you see that those are actually the kind of sector that declined so much. So it's a reflection of, and it's a little, it's also a kind of pain we need to, or penalty or cost we need to pay for COVID-19 crisis. I mean, in order to stem the spread and ensure that we get hold of it. So that number is expected. But if you look at yesterday before the release, when you look at the consensus analysts, I mean, people were expecting between 4 to 5.5% decline. All this forecast, but I mean, it could have been worse. I mean, you look at what is happening in the US, which is experienced about 32% decline. Look, I mean, no country is absorbed of this crisis.
Okay.
But I think the most priority for okay. Yeah, over to you.
Okay, Dr. Adedeji, I'll come back to you in a bit, because it seems from your own analysis, you're saying that COVID-19 should be totally blamed. But let me come to Mr. Chukwu right now. With this GDP numbers for the second quarter for 2020, if it continues like this, that means we are just a quarter away from a recession, and that may be the worst recession in 40 years, as it were. The recession we suffered in 2016 was the worst recession in 25 years. And this administration will suffer another recession if the numbers look like this again next quarter. That means it will be 2 recessions in 4 years. Should this GDP contraction be totally blamed on coronavirus pandemic? because we've also started seeing some kind of signs in Q2'20 2019. Precisely, the borders were closed last year. I think August is Q3 yes, August 2019. So will the coronavirus pandemic, will it be totally blamed for this outcome?
Nancy, the way I would put it is this: maybe the negative growth will be directly attributed to coronavirus, but we have always had in the past 4 years what we call fragile economic growth. And if you look at last year, the total GDP figure grew by just 2.27% last year. The last quarter of last year grew by 2.55%. The first quarter of this year, it had contracted by it only grew by 1.87%. And over the past 4 years, since the economy contracted by 1.58% in 2016, the 2017 growth was very tepid. It was just 0.82%. 2018 was 1.91%. And 2019, like I said, was only 2.27%. So you saw a very fragile growth that anything could have tipped it to the negative. And so it was easy for COVID-19 to tip us to the negative because the growth was not on a very strong footing. So that's why I said that you can actually say, yes, it became negative because of COVID-19, but it had always been a very fragile growth that some of us have actually been screaming that if anything goes wrong in the economy, that the economy will easily go belly up, which is what we've seen. Because if you disaggregate the growth we saw in the previous quarters, and you realize that whenever we were driven largely by oil growth, last quarter we saw an oil growth of 5.06%. I mean, oil sector growth of 5.06% at the time when the entire economy grew by only 2.55%. Grew by 1.87%. So you could say that growth was largely driven by the oil and gas sector. Now, in the second quarter of this year, the oil and gas sector actually contracted by 6.63%, added to the contraction in the non-oil sector of about 6.05%. So it's a situation where the economy was weak, growth was very fragile, and then we now had a global pandemic that had multiple impacts, not just in Nigeria, but in other countries of the world. And for a fragile economy like ours, the expectation was that we're going to have a very severe contraction. It's actually consoling that the contraction was only 6.11%, principally because sectors like the financial services sector grew by over 18%. We saw telecommunications sector grow by 15.06%, and agriculture grew by 1.58%. Like I've always said, if telecommunications sector is growing significantly and agri is growing significantly, they could moderate the contraction in the economy, which is part of what we saw. If you look at those two sectors, they account for 42% of the economy today. Agriculture sector 24.6%, and then telecommunications sector 17.8%. So if you sum up those two, you have a 42% share of the GDP. And if agriculture sector had grown about the same rate as the telco sector grew, maybe it would have had a near zero GDP contraction.
Okay, Dr. Adedeji, let's quickly break down some of those numbers. Just like Mr. Chukwu has started it, we saw growth in the ICT sector and in the agri sector. Let's talk about the sectors which we saw a contraction. We saw contraction, of course, in food services, accommodation, storage, that's transport and storage and all of that. Speak to me about your views about this.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, if you look at where we have the full branch of this, significant decline, these are sectors that, so look at transportation, for instance, international travels, both local and international, were stopped. If you look at, say for instance, education sector, up to now school have not resumed, and the implication is that there is actually minimal activities that is going on there. So you expect exactly the figure we are saying. But I mean, what he mentioned is that we should have actually see something even much more drastic than what we saw in terms of 6%. I mean, that's consoling to have that. And that shows you some things that or lessons we can learn going forward. Look at financial sector. I mean, financial sector, banks were closed down, but the sector still recorded growth. It means that sectors that can actually transit towards the digital platforms are quite of insulated from the shock. ICT also, a lot of people shifted activities online. And for that reason, you see that the effect on the ICT sector is also quite minor. I mean, we recorded the highest growth in that sector. I mean, when you mention agriculture, I mean, it was part of the essential service actually during the lockdown. So agricultural activities was allowed to move all around, both in terms of transportation and the rest, of farmers to go to, and in fact, majority of places that suffers lockdown are not agro-based kind of location. So that numbers to me, it shows us both something to worry about and something like the potential whereby that is telling us ICT is one area we need to look at. I mean, over the past 5 years, that sector has been part of the major driver of our economy. If you compare the share of ICT in contribution to the economy, and you compare the share of oil sector to the economy, the share of ICT trumped that of the oil sector. And we have been actually championing oil sector over this year. So it shows that these are kind of things we need to look at and how to use it, because ICT alone is a sector in itself, but it's also an enabler for other sectors. Imagine if, like the financial sector was able to move. Imagine we could have moved all our education system online. We will now have a complete close down whereby for more than 4 months now, kids are not learning. I mean, you see the number for education sector in terms of number of people that have contact with their schools or they are learning. More than 50% are not learning in this coronavirus anything. And so it shows that there are potential ways we can actually absorb ourselves from this kind of shock.
Dr. Adeniran, let me still stick with you a bit before I come to Mr. Chukwu. With what we saw from the GDP numbers yesterday, ICT growing, which we've said, does that mean that perhaps we should begin to look at other sectors that contracted and just how they can be enabled by ICT, just like you have said? But how realistic is that with the kind of structure of the economy that we have right now? How realistic is it to enable other sectors so that perhaps when things like this happen again, we'll be a bit more resilient?
Thank you very much. So I think two things is quite important. One, the kind of enabler for those kind of digital transformation, we need to get it done. I mean, if you look at broadband technology, you can see that in Abuja, Lagos, but you would know its absence in many parts of the country. So we need those kind of technology to be put in place. But more essentially, we need to ride on the moment that we have now. I mean, there's a momentum around. You see my parents that have a party for technology. They are on Zoom. I mean, so all sorts of things. People that cannot actually know the value or have been trying to discard the technological or digital revolution. Everybody is now actually see the essence, see the benefit. And if we don't ride on it, we're just going to lose the momentum and go back to normal. So we need to say, okay, going forward, this is actually the future. And you cannot teach kids that don't know about technology. You can't ask them to transit to online if they have not actually, that skill has not been embedded into as part of the education system. So for instance, I mean, in our schools, we need to dust up our curriculum. It's no longer ability to, I mean, at primary school level, it's not the 3 hours writing, reading, and arithmetic. It has to also include digital skills, whereby they need to do a lot of things. So we need to prepare. It is the preparation that will then serve as a way of using this to launch as a launch pad for robust technology.
Okay, let me ask Mr. Chukwu this, which is, if we're saying that we should enable other sectors with the example we're seeing in ICT sector, and I guess that the minister was quite happy when he saw that. He described it as a welcome development, at least with what I read. If you take a look at the US, for example, the US is more enabled, at least the other sectors are more enabled. But this is also an economy that has posted unemployment numbers in huge sums. You understand what I mean, at least in the last report. Does that mean that the ICT sector is just the El Dorado, is what we are waiting for, is the next big thing, as has been said? Because even in other climes, the US, the UK, the Western economies, they do have those things more than us, but they're also reeling. Most of the economies are also in recession. Some are going to go into recession. So is it the El Dorado as is being painted?
Well, Nancy, the way I would look at it is that ICT is an enabler. Adoption of ICT is facilitating a lot of businesses, a lot of things that were not possible before. Today, you are talking of telemedicine. People can carry out operations from remote location, but there still must be a doctor physically with the patient. And if you look at, for instance, the global economies, in as much as ICT is an enabler to several segments of the economy, there are still some sectors of the economy that are physical in nature, and you really can't do anything about that. ICT will be part of their service value chain, but ICT will not necessarily replace the structure of those sectors. I'll give you an instance, or instances. If you look at the GDP figures, for instance, in the case of Nigeria, and you look at the sector that contracted the most, it was transport and storage. So you're talking of airline industry, airline subsector, the luxury buses, the taxis. If you recall, at the peak of the economic, the COVID-19 crisis, all the airports were shut down, the airspace was closed down, flights were disrupted, interstate transport was disrupted, taxis were not moving around, people were not even allowed to drive from their homes to anywhere. So that sector is partly physical, and it suffered the worst contraction. It suffered a contraction about 49%. Second to that is accommodation and food services. The hotels were shut down. You can book hotel, you can make the hotel reservation, you can make airline reservation, you can make your bus transport reservations electronically or virtually using ICT platform, but you must go and enter the plane. And ICT will not carry you from here to Were or to Kanu. So you must have the physical movement. And in as much as ICT will enable them to carry out some of their services remotely, but some physical component of their business must be there. The hotel and food services, you can book online, but you cannot stay in the hotel online. You still have to go there physically. And if the hotel is shut down, it's shut down. The third sector that contracted, the construction industry. You have to physically move materials around. You have to get labor to do a lot of the things. You can do your designing virtually, but you still have to move physically to build the roads, build the houses. So what I'm saying in effect that ICT will act as enabler in several sectors of the economy, but ICT will not replace some structure, some physical engagement by humanity.
Mr. Chukwu, let me still stick with you a bit. With all this that we're talking about, the different sectors that suffered contraction and that experienced growth, what does these numbers, what do these numbers mean to an average Nigerian watching us right now? An average Nigerian, not for those in that sector, an average Nigerian watching us right now, what does it mean? What should he or she take out from these numbers?
Okay, the take home from these numbers is that there are some sectors that have become bellwether. Those sectors are sectors that will survive economic downturn because of the essential nature of the sector. The agriculture sector, though it grew by only 1.58%, but they survived contraction in the global economy, the Nigerian economy. The ICT sector had the fastest growth. The banking sector had the fastest growth of about 28%. That sector, it simply means that what we're seeing is a migration from brick and mortar services to electronic services. So that sector is a sector that will continue to expand. And for those who are looking for jobs, it simply means that sector that is safe. Those who are making investment, it also means that's a sector to invest in. Then the other sector that also grew I did mention the agriculture sector, the banking sector, the ICT sector. We have emphasized that repeatedly. That also grew. Public services, of course, grew, but grew marginally. But the key sector that grew were the financial service sector, one, the ICT sector, two, the agriculture sector, three. So these sectors are sectors that, if you have to look for a job, if you're working in those sectors, the likelihood that you will lose your job as a result of this pandemic is less. Even if you go to the capital market and you look at the companies that have continued to publish bumper returns or very strong performance in half year of 2020, you see the two quoted companies in the agriculture sector, Okumu Oil and Bresco, they actually declared very strong results. Some operators in the banking industry also reported very good results. So these are just to mirror the fact that some sectors have remained resilient by the nature of their services. And they are sectors that young people should consider as areas to build their career.
For the sectors that are suffering contraction, Dr. Adeniran, I'm coming to you now. For the sectors that are suffering contraction, does it mean that for people in those sectors, they should navigate, they should jump ship, perhaps to sectors that are growing? And for those that have businesses in those sectors, what does it mean? I'm trying to break it down so that it's not just that we're esoteric and we're talking these economic issues with the jargons. I'm trying to break it down so that Nigerians will understand why these numbers matter.
Okay, so when you look at, also we're in Q3 already, so, and these are just Q2 numbers. So so it's already what a lot of people have been feeling. It's just like me and you were confirming, okay, maybe my income I've been making 100,000 in a month before now. It's declined to 50,000. And it's just a reflection of what has been happening, in many homes. So it's just like a confirmation of what a lot of people have been experiencing. And actually, if you do even talk to people, do market surveys and the rest, you see a lot of complaints, a lot of issues. You get a lot of vibes that indicate that this is the reality, or this is what people have been living. But I don't think it would be very premature to use that a quarter figure to quickly start jumping from one sector to the other. Because when you want to move from one sector to the other, say for example, let me say doctors are doing well. I'm an academic doctor, so you can say, okay, can I jump to becoming a doctor? I need to go back to school. That takes 7 years, a lot of things. So it's not like it's not a good way to take in terms of career choices or select.
But Dr. Adeniran, let me halt you a bit there. Haven't you also seen a trend in the last few quarters? Even though we have a fragile growth, some sectors were also not doing well. Some sectors were also experiencing negative growth, even while we were 1.87% growth is in Q1 of 2020 and all of that. You understand what I mean? So it's what,
I understand your
yes,
point.
it's not fantastic really for many sectors. So there's a trend.
So there's a trend. No doubt. So, but my point is, if you look at that trend in terms of, if we look at Nigerian economy, we've not been doing well before the recession. And my point has always been that even when we talked about going forward or economic recovery, it's not just to go back to where we left it off. We need to actually go to something better, which doesn't reflect in our past. And for that reason, when you look at what are the kind of things we should be thinking of, it's not to discard any sector. That's my point. You can't say we should look at this sector. There are potential in those sectors you talked about negative growth. Look at, for example, one of the sectors that has not been doing very well is the real sector. But you can't grow an economy or manufacturing sector itself. You can't grow an economy or you can't create a decent job without a viable manufacturing sector. So it's not a transition that we, in terms of people moving, but in terms of let's look at how can we develop the potentials of this sector. Our manufacturing sector is in comatose. And that's one of the main problem we've had over the past years in terms of economic transformation. I mean, you have manufacturing sector contributing 8% to your GDP, and you have a lot of unemployment. I mean, see the link, look at high poverty. And without we restructuring or getting it right on our industry, we can't be self-sufficient and we cannot grow our economy. We can't create the kind of job that we need. So what we need is first, there is ongoing development with the COVID-19 is to reduce the impact on us. And how do we do that? I mean, you see, like in Q3, there has been gradual reopening of the economy. We need to sustain this reopening process in our economy. That's the first one. I mean, we need to reopen sectors that we think has limited impact in, like cinemas, that has limited impact, and they can introduce structural measures to limit the spread of diseases through their channels.
Okay.
We need to do. But in the longer term, I mean, we need to rethink about our productivity. Are we doing enough in that in every sector? I mean, even where we are going, we look at ICT. ICT is a sector that is growing, but we have not reached the cap. I mean, there is much more that we can do in that sector than what we are doing.
Okay, okay. Let me come to Mr. Chukwu. Dr. Adeniran, sorry for halting you because we just have a few minutes, and I want to put as many things in before we end the program. The rescue and the recovery efforts that we've seen from the government, I mean both federal and state, will it really be enough for us to steer the corner come Q3? Because both of you agreed to the fact that you were expecting perhaps more contraction, more than 6%. So with the rescue and recovery efforts that we've seen by the government, do you think that the contraction level will be a bit better in Q3? Mr. Chukwu?
Well, what I would rather say is that the contraction in Q3 may be less than that of Q2, principally because the economy has been opened up to some extent. Those sectors that contracted most are beginning to see activities in their businesses. I did mention the transport and storage that contracted at 49%. Of course, we know the airports have reopened. In fact, the international flight should resume on 29th of August. The public transport have resumed, interstate movements have resumed. So the level of economic activities in the transport sector and storage sector will improve better than it was in the second quarter of this year, because second quarter witnessed a complete lockdown. Okay. Secondly, if you look at accommodation and food services, a lot of the hotels have also reopened. Construction activities have resumed. So what I think is that the economy will do better, not necessarily be positive in terms of GDP in the third quarter, not because of stimulus. I think the stimulus we have seen have largely been affected. The fiscal side of the stimulus have been there we're not seeing it. We're not feeling the impact. I know in terms of the monetary side of stimulus, we know the central bank is still disbursing the 100 billion to the healthcare sector, is distributing or disbursing 1 trillion to the critical sectors of the economy. The 50 billion to small and medium scale enterprises must have been substantially disbursed. So in the injection of liquidity coming from the monetary authorities have largely been affected. The fiscal side is what is lacking, and I don't see how so much impact that we have as to make us escape recession. Nancy, before I let you let me go, recall that even the Economic Sustainability Plan made provision for 2.3 trillion naira, and even with that, the government is projecting that the economy will contract by 0.59%. As at H1 2020, that's first half of this year, the economy actually contracted by 2.18%. So for you to have a 0.59% contraction at the end of this year simply means that the second half of the year will be positive, stronger than 2.18%, which I think will be a tall order.
So still sticking with you before I move over to Dr. Adeniran. So what kind of growth do you see? Of course, we're experiencing a negative growth now. Do you think, or when do you think we will turn the corner? Is it after Q3? What kind of growth do you expect for whom, and what is the desired outcome? Because a lot of economies are now saying, okay, fine, we need to see growth, whether it's an L-shaped growth, a U-shaped growth, a V-shaped growth, or even a W-shaped growth.
I don't think we will see growth the remaining 2 quarters of this year. I think we may turn the corner early next year. Why do I say so? Some of those sectors that are really in difficulties, I can't see any stimulus going to them. Look at the trade sector that has been in recession for quite some time. Trade sector contracted by more than 16%, and the trade sector accounts for 14% of the GDP. Nothing, in fact, the trade facilitation is actually being weakened further by FS limitations and constraints. So you expect that sector to still suffer negative growth in the remaining 2 quarters. The manufacturing sector contracted by 8.7%. Manufacturing sector accounts for about 8.82% of the GDP. That sector, if you have FX bottlenecks, it will have a direct impact on the manufacturing sector. So you should expect a further contraction in the manufacturing sector in the remaining 2 quarters of this year. So the key thing is that the oil and gas sector contracted by 6.63%. We are still dealing with OPEC imposed production limitation, which is now allowing Nigeria to produce more than 1.4 million barrels of, although we reported 1.81 million barrels crude production in this quarter, in last quarter. But remember that includes our condensate. Okay. So I don't expect our production to be materially above the 1.81 million barrels per day, including condensate.
Okay, Dr. Adeniran, very quickly, speak to me about the link between, because our unemployment numbers also came out, 27%, not looking good. All the numbers we're getting right now on the economic front, not looking good. Inflation, 12.82%. In fact, the World Bank, just a few months ago, when I interviewed the World Bank country director, they did tell me that under a business as usual scenario, if Nigeria continues the current pace of growth and employment level by 2030, Nigeria would account for about 25% of the world's extreme poor people. So, link to me GDP numbers that are not looking pretty, inflation numbers that are high, unemployment numbers. I think we are suffering from stagflation. Isn't it what economics call it? Very quickly, in 30 seconds.
Okay, I mean, so with this number and the way it is going, it means that the road is will be long for us. So our recovery will depend first on how much we can get both treatment or vaccine to get hold on COVID-19. With that, things can go back to, economic activities can kickstart. But in terms of, if we want that numbers of poverty, the poverty numbers, like you mentioned, that's from last year's survey. It's not because of COVID-19. The job numbers you mentioned is not because of COVID-19. Is the trend we've been experiencing over the years. So, and it means that it's not about just the normal kind of policy, and we need to look at a lot of things. For example, we need to look at what is subnational government doing in
okay.
What is the rest?
Dr. Adeniran, I think we'll leave it at that. So many things to dissect and chew with this report, because it dovetails into a lot of things. But I want to say many thanks to you both for joining me today. Thank you, Dr. Adeniran, for joining us. Mr. Chukwu, thank you very much, as always, for joining us.
Our pleasure.
All right, that's the much we can take on today's edition of the program. I've been speaking with Johnson Chukwu, the Group Managing Director at Cowry Asset Management, as well as Dr. Adedeji Adeniran, Director at CSEA. All right, join us again tomorrow, same time, same station. I am Nnaji. Continue to observe safety protocols to avoid contracting coronavirus. I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye now. Thank you for watching our video. Please hit the subscribe button below, turn on post notification to follow all our updates.